I think there is no question that we all know the reality of the Houston Texans the past couple of years, and that is Hurricane Bob ran through that organization and left them in absolute effing shambles. You can say certainly a big piece of that was the whole Deshaun Watson saga and him not playing and then having to figure out a way to move on from him and ultimately trading him before last season to the Cleveland Browns. That was a big deal, right? But yeah, that was one piece of the much larger picture, and it wasn't good. It hasn't been good. And, you look at 2021, they hired David Culley to be the head coach, and then they fired him after one season. And in 2022, it's like, hey, they're going to give Lovie Smith a chance. Here we go. Lovie Smith gets a third NFL head coaching job. First, I believe, the first minority coach to be able to do so. That's progress. That's what I'm talking about here. But ultimately, it was predictably a bad year for the Houston Texans. Another year, another one-and-done head coach. Lovie Smith was fired at the end of the season. And, I will say, if nothing else, Lovie made sure that he got his revenge before he got fired in that Week 18 game against the Colts. He made sure he gave one last gift to the Bears with some big Sandy, Texas love, as the Texans had one job to do all year, one job, and that was to finish the tank, go the distance, and get that number 1 overall pick. And they didn't get it done because Lovie said, fuck all that, we're going to win in Week 18, finish 3-14, but lose the tiebreaker to the Bears. Yeah! Poor Texans fans, they had waited all year for this moment just to have it yanked away from them. That's brutal. So Lovie Smith was fired, and in the offseason, DeMeco Ryans, former Houston Texans linebacker, one of the first great players in that organization's history, if you think about it. You think back to the early years of the Texans, obviously it was Andre Johnson's team, and you had Arian Foster for a stretch, right? You had Matt Shaw, made a couple Pro Bowls. But when you look at the defense, it was DeMeco Ryans, it's Brian Cushing, those were the dudes on that defense before J.J. Watt got there. So he comes back home, and he's hired away from the 49ers as defensive coordinator to be this team's head coach. And hopefully, we'll get more than one season. That would be great. It was really odd to see the Texans go transition coach, now to DeMeco Ryans. We'll see how it all plays out. This was a team that was very active in free agency, but the way you would describe their activity in free agency, it was a lot of level 3, level 4, lower tier free agents. Now you had a Dalton Schultz mixed in there. You had a Devin Singletary mixed in there. But yeah, they brought in a bunch of guys, Sheldon Rankins and Robert Woods and Devin Singletary. I mentioned him already. Jimmy Ward, Hassan Ridgeway. They brought in a bunch of dudes via free agency, but they will make the team better, but that doesn't say a whole lot, and it doesn't mean that most of these guys were great either. Because I think the Texans are looking at it right now and saying, hey, we need to be able to build through the draft. That's where it's going to start. And what's interesting about the draft, there was a lot of talk before the draft of whether or not the Texans were even going to take a quarterback at number 2 and if Will Anderson was going to be the guy. Well, we found out what they thought. The Panthers ended up trading up to pick 1 ahead of the Texans so they could take Bryce Young, which then put the Texans in the spot at pick 2 where they took C.J. Stroud from Ohio State. And I'm glad they did. Now, I certainly could have made a very strong argument for Anthony Richardson, you're really, really bad anyway, swing for the fences. Which quarterback, if he reaches his maximum potential, would you rather not have to face twice a year in your division because you're thinking and knowing that Indianapolis is going to draft a quarterback? Would you rather face C.J. Stroud twice a year or Anthony Richardson twice a year? Fair question. But I love the C.J. Stroud selection for them. What I wasn't such a big fan of is them trading up like they did to give up a 2024 first-round pick for Will Anderson. Not a fan of that whatsoever. Didn't feel like that was the appropriate time, the appropriate place, especially in a draft that was pretty deep in edge rushers, right? I wasn't really a fan of that. I love them taking Tank Dell in the 3rd round, Juice Struggs in round 2. I thought was a bit of a reach, but it is what it is. So I expect all of those guys, to contribute quite a bit to the Texans in 2023. As I look at this team this year, it's kind of lean in terms of the strengths. This is still not a very good roster. Let's just be honest there. But I do look at DeMeco Ryans, and I love this hire for them. This job means more to him. He comes with a track record of success as a coach, at least on the defensive side. And while I'm not the biggest in the modern NFL of hiring defensive-minded head coaches, especially when you have a young quarterback that you need to develop, if you're going to hire a defensive guy, this was a pretty good one for the Texans to hire. So I look at him as being like somebody that, if nothing else, provides stability for this organization the next few years. That will be an added bonus. Ironically enough, we talk about quarterback, and I'll talk about C.J. Stroud more in depth in a moment. But one thing that this team does have, if you actually give a shit about wins and losses for the Texans this year, which you really shouldn't to me if you're a Texans fan, is they've got some depth at quarterback. You've got C.J. Stroud, you've got Mills, you've got Case Keenum, who was signed in free agency. So if like C.J. Stroud's really ineffective and you want to handle the quarterback poorly, or if C.J. Stroud gets hurt, you shouldn't notice a precipitous drop-off in performance based off of what they have in their quarterback room. That's a pretty solid quarterback room. And then look at the running back depth. You got Dameon Pierce. You signed Mike Boone. You brought in Devin Singletary as well. And that's a solid running back group, running back committee, if you will. And this is a team that should be able to run the ball at least somewhat effectively this year. But let's not kid ourselves. Most of this roster still stinks pretty bad. The receiving core just stinks to me. You've got Nico Collins, Robert Woods, Noah Brown, John Mechie III. Glad to see him coming back from, leukemia last year, the cancer treatment. But that's not a receiving core that inspires any type of confidence. Dalton Schultz, you could throw him in there like he's good, right? Nice to have a trustworthy tight end for your rookie quarterback to throw to, but not the greatest receiving core for him to work with. I don't look at that linebacking core and have any type of confidence in them. I think that unit kind of stinks too, but maybe they could be coached up by a DeMeco Ryans to be better. That is certainly possible. But the only thing that matters about this season, let's be very clear here, the only thing that matters is not wins and losses, especially because the Texans don't have their own first-round picks, so who gives a shit? It comes down to C.J. Stroud and his development. Point blank, period. If he's healthy, he needs to play every game. I don't even care if he goes out there and stretches and he stinks. He absolutely stinks. He needs to be able to play through that. He has to learn how to overcome that. He has to learn how to adjust. He has to learn how to be a professional. It all comes down to him. And if the Texans go through this season and win like 4 or 5 games, but C.J. Stroud shows you enough to where you're like, yeah, he looks like he could be the guy. Yeah, he looks like he's a franchise type of quarterback. Then, man, things get so much better for the Houston Texans in a great big hurry. Now, I do expect the Texans, even with a rookie quarterback starting in C.J. Stroud, to be a better team this year. I do. And I look at some of their schedule, and I do find some winnable games there, like weeks 2 through 5. They host Indianapolis. That's a winnable game. Week 3 at Jacksonville. You say, well, the Jaguars are going to be really good this year. I agree, but this is also one of those games, you talk about the Texans. They can beat the Jags. They've done it before. They did it last year, didn't they? And that could be a type of game where the Jags kind of overlook them a little bit. Week 4, they host Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh has a bad history under Mike Tomlin of losing to bad teams, especially on the road. Week 5 at Atlanta. Then you go weeks 8 and 9 at Carolina and Tampa Bay. Week 11, Arizona. Look, it would not be out of the realm of possibility here for this Texans team to win 8 or 9 games. If they handle their business in those games that I talked about and find a way to win a couple more, it can happen. I don't think it's likely. I think it's more like a 5 or 6 win team, and they're going to bring up the rear in the division. But this year, that doesn't matter. This is about progress. Progress and stability that DeMeco Ryans provides as head coach. Progress in C.J. Stroud as an NFL starting quarterback. If this team wins 5 or 6 games and C.J. Stroud shows growth and progression throughout the year and gives you confidence he could be the guy long term, then this would be a hell of a successful season for the Houston Texans.